We have our printer up here in the attic, and I am getting older, and I'm forever like, oh, I forgot to print the document while I was upstairs, and I have to go upstairs again. But now I've switched to good. I'm glad I'm going again, right? Just do more. Or you're taking all this stuff to the beach and you didn't remember, fine. Just walk back and forth 5 times. Who cares? I'm telling you, if we lived in the Stone Age, we would all be walking back and forth to the car 10,000 times, right? There's just we were nomads, right? We have some idea that if you're smart and efficient, then you're just going to go straight from the house to the car, and from the car get a good parking spot and go right to the thing. And that's not what your body wants to do.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Better with Dr. Stephanie. It's me, your host, Dr. Stephanie Estima, and today we are talking all about injury prevention, how to know what is going on in your hips, how to know how to land properly, and why stopping is a superpower or deceleration. Now, before we get into it, I just want to make sure that you understand why you need to listen to the show. So if you are a cardio bunny, you grew up in the cardio section of the gym, and now you want to be a muscle mommy, or you want to excel in any, whether it's leisure or professional sport, or you just want to have longevity in the gym, this is going to be the episode for you, because we want to be able to stay injury-free for the long term. When you are injured in midlife, man, you just don't bounce back the way that you did when you were 20 or 30, and that's just a reality. So I think that you're going to find that this is going to have a lot of useful action items in it. I will say that this is leaning on the dark roast Betty side. So I caught myself using the words anterior superior iliac spine very early on in the conversation. So that means I was very excited technically about the biomechanics that we were talking about. But I don't want you to get discouraged by that medicalese. We will go through everything with you. So I'm just going to ask you to hang in. If there's some big words in there, we always say the words and then translate the words for everyday people. You don't need to have a medical degree to listen to this show. And I think that you're going to find a lot of useful information here. So my guest today is Henry Abbott. He is the author of the book called Ballistic, and he is the TrueHoop founder. He's a prominent figure in sports media. He's renowned for his innovative contributions as a journalist and as the founder of TrueHoop. Previously, Henry led a dedicated team of 60 at ESPN, where he spearheaded the NBA's digital and print initiatives, resulting in several groundbreaking articles that garnered a National Magazine Award. He is, as I mentioned, the author of the acclaimed book Ballistic, The New Science of Injury-Free Athletic Performance, which is available at major retailers. So enjoy this conversation with Henry Abbott. All right, and we're live. Henry, I'm so happy to welcome you to the show. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I am excited to talk to you today about injury risk. We're going to talk about biomechanics, particularly movement, landing patterns and movement patterns as it pertains to the knees, the hips, the ankles. We were talking just before we got started. I was telling you about my we call them our Betties, our perimenopausal Betties, who are now moving from the cardio section of the gym to the weight section of the gym, who are hearing me talk about sprint training and jump training for bone density. And of course, that comes with risk. Every movement comes with risk, especially if we don't have that motor patterning in it. So I thought we might just start with just some key biomechanics, like what happens in an ideal scenario when we are jumping and landing, when we are sprinting. What are some things that we want to consider for mechanics for the hip, the knees, and the feet?
Oh, I'm glad we have 90 minutes.
Yeah. Not an easy. It's we'll just start with the most difficult question. And 4 years of my professional training.
Right now.
Exactly.
So I guess at the basic level, they are applauding for you at P3, which is the lab in Santa Barbara, where I just wrote up this book, Ballistic, about their mission. They've gone on this decades of sorting out the answer to what you're saying, right? And you're trying to use granular movement data. So it's 1 million data points per athlete. And then they have thousands of athletes over the years and trying to match who ends up with an injury and what did they move 6 months before, a year before, et cetera. I think we're going to find over time this is the right approach to answering your really good question. And from all of that, right, there's so many, there are more rows in the spreadsheet than Excel permits, right, as they're studying this. And they're just trying to put all of this, every potential thing. It could be valgus, it could be hip angle, it could be ankle mobility, all of these factors, they put them all in and they emerge with really like the probably the tip top number one riskiest thing that can happen is that you land on the outside of your foot and then have your foot roll to the inside, which does a lot of bad things upstream. Primarily, it puts your knee in a very dangerous position. And in one study of NBA players, 100% of players who had a catastrophic knee injury landed in that manner. So that's a big one. The other big one that they're really worried about is you and I may squat next to each other, like in the gym, and we may be the same height and squat the same amount and have our hips go back the same amount, but one of us might have the femur bone rotate inside your leg. Femoral rotation. It's very hard to picture. It's hard to even see. I can't see it. The people I wrote the book about can. So can the computer with the sensors that they use. And you can imagine with that bone rotating, it would put a little tension on the tendons and ligaments of your knee. And you can fix that. You can fix both of these things. You can change both of these things, and we can talk more about that. But I think in general, they're huge fans of everyone doing some kind of plyometrics, explosive movement. There's a reason the book is called Ballistic. And they're a fan of everyone doing weight training. And I just learned from you the term cardio bunny, which cracks me up.
And muscle mommy.
And muscle mommy.
And muscle mommies, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you want to get all this, right? They would say you want to get all of this to get that whole kinetic chain working symphonically, right? You want to bend your ankles, knees, and hips together synchronously and to absorb the force of landing. But I think those are the big keys, is to use those joints, to use them excitingly, get a bit of movement in your life, get a little bounce, get a little impulse, and the neurological process will unfold to make you better at that if you practice it. And I think that's the main thing I learned from spending so much time at P3 in Santa Barbara.
Yeah, it's an interesting, you talk about repeating it and doing the same movement over and over again. There's something to be said about physical literacy. We talk about being able to read, or if you can speak different languages, or any other skill. And I think that what is often missing, and of course there's budget cuts and, without getting political and all, but I think that there's an aspect of physical literacy that's missing in education. Like, we all learned about the geography and the history and, whatever, but the spending cuts and the budget cuts, I think, to physical education is far more detrimental, for learning, first of all. But I think that being able to acquire a new motor skill, like, this is why I'll often joke on the show and say something like, like same squat, different shirt. It's like the reason why I have the proficiency in deadlifts or squats in the way that I do is because I've literally been doing it for decades. Mm-hmm. It's not because there's something special about me. It's not that I'm smarter it's just because I have done it 10,000 plus hours. I've just done it over and over and over again. And that motor learning, there has to be a certain amount of hours that you're putting into it. And so this is why I wanted to we can maybe start talking a little bit about hips. So the two things you said, just to reframe it, is landing on the outside of the foot and rolling to the inside. So that lateral translation, and then that femoral rotation that is going to be putting tension or torque on some of the ligaments and tendons in the knee. Now, for women, who are the main consumers of this show, one of the more, in addition to menstrual cycle and hormonal changes, but just in terms of structural anatomy, of course, we have a wider pelvic basin for biologically just to be able to grow a baby and pass that through
create
the birth
a miracle
canal.
Yeah,
to create the miracle of life.
Yep.
So that's going to translate to a larger Q angle. So this is basically just an angle. It's actually just two lines. You'd go from, so for my nerds listening, my dark roast betties, it's the ASIS, right? The anterior superior iliac spine, a line down to the center of the patella, and then the other lines going up to the tibial tubercle. And you basically take an angle between those two. For men, it's typically about 14 degrees. For women, it's 3 or more, like it's 17-ish degrees for most adult women. There's some variance there, but that's a significant difference when you're landing and you have a wider hip. And all that to say, all that like ASIS, all that anatomical jargon, all that to say is that women are more likely to be knock-kneed, right? So we are more likely to have our knees to have more medial stress on the inside part of the knee than on the outside part of the knee. And actually, interestingly, I was just talking to Stacey Sims, and we were talking about this idea of this is why a lot of girls drop out of sport. Like when they're 6 or 7 or 8, pre-puberty, they kind of look just like they run just like the guys, same speed, same capacity. And then as puberty hits, and of course we see men with the testosterone surge, but women's hips get wider, and then their base of support comes down from like sort of the mid chest to about the navel area. Our mechanics totally change. So
wait, I'm sorry, can I stop you there? What do you mean by base of support? This is fascinating.
Or our center, I shouldn't have said base of support. Sorry,
okay.
Center of gravity is what I meant to say. I apologize. Lower. So for men, this is why it's very easy, let's say for a man to do a pull-up. And I think it's statistically significant that like 98% of women will not be able to do one pull up because our shoulders are not as broad and our center of gravity actually migrates downwards to our navel versus men where the center of I keep wanting to say base of support. That's wrong. Strike that from the record. The center of gravity is a little bit higher.
Yeah.
So they're able to do pull-ups to the clavicle, pull-ups to the sternum. And like women are basically with a neutral grip can barely punch out one.
That's fascinating. So I want to thank you so much for you kind of nerded out there, and I feel a lot of permission to be my natural self now.
Yes, please nerd out. Yes.
So there's a lot of that I can say here. So this guy Håkan Brottström, I don't know if I'm saying his name right. At the end of World War II, he's this researcher who really focused the world on Q angles, right? And he had an X-ray machine, and he was obsessed with people who dislocated their knee, and he went around and like did this 164-page classic study which showed that people who had extreme Q angles, who had big valgus collapse or more knock-kneed, were much more likely to displace their knee. And then this Q angle got on the radar of every academic journal, and now it's one of the most studied things in biomechanics, right, is this Q angle. And so there was no reason for the people at P3 to doubt that when they started doing all these assessments with the sensors all over the body and getting 1 million data points per person. But they would put 22 markers all over the body, which I think the math is maybe something like 231 angles, right? One of which on each side was the Q angle. I did the math when I wrote the book. I'm working from memory now. I'm 50. I might have gotten it wrong. But it's something like 231. But what they noticed was, so like people, athletes would jump off an 18-inch box and land on these force plates with all these sensors on their body. And you would expect that this Q angle number would then correlate with injuries, because that's what all the journals say. Multiple injuries, right, are correlated with Q angle. And long story short, it doesn't affect injuries at all in their data. It's a non-factor. Instead, it's sometimes a marker for femoral rotation. Like if your femur rotates, you might have a steep Q angle. And then that's where the injuries come from. And there's actually, if you look there, like, I went through them all in the book, but there's every single study of like what causes ACL tears in women has a counter study. It's super frustrating, right? There's people about like the width of the canal that your ligament sits in, and on and on. But there are like women who actually tear their ACLs don't have steeper Q angles than women who do. It's super frustrating because the mechanism makes sense. But I think this is one example of how this granular movement data, so like Brottström was using an X-ray machine, and he has an angle that a human can see with their naked eye, right? It's very easy for us to believe, but it's been super frustrating in predicting and preventing injuries. Whereas this really big machine learning inspired 1 million data points per assessment technique is unlocking a whole different view of what matters. And I think this might be one example of that, is like, if your femur rotates, big problem. There are merely having valgus collapse does in fact correlate with like non-catastrophic knee injuries in their data, like wear and tear on the cartilage of your knee, etc. It's not good. They don't want you to have valgus collapse, but it's not actually upstream of catastrophic knee injuries in men or women in their data, which is a big difference from the historical research.
And what's interesting there too, talking about just contradicting research, is the idea that collapsing the knees for a squat, let's say, was typically viewed as bad. And then I've also seen just literally the opposite, where it's like, actually you can activate the glute medius if you do more of like an X squat. So on the, when you're coming down and you allow that valgum, like you allow that knee knocking, and maybe that's the femoral, it could partially be the femoral rotation, but it seems like you can also activate some of the abductors of the hip when the knees are collapsing, which maybe it's a good thing if you're trying to initiate if you're trying to train for hip stability. But I wonder if there's something to be said there as well. Like maybe with that increased Q angle, maybe we're able to train just naturally. Glute medius and minimus maybe is just naturally stronger because it's always working to sort of externally rotate, let's say, the femur, and then you're getting that protective effect.
And I think that could all be true. This is 600 muscles that have to work symphonically, right? And it would be weird if there were a recommendation that worked for all of us, right? It's like an orchestra, and it's like, the oboe's a little off key in this person, so it's causing that weird sound from their orchestra, right? Like there's not, like the medical journals are designed to be univariate analysis, right? They're going to have, does increased hip flexion lead to problems, right? And a lot of what they find in this, kind of bigger machine learning based model is that these things don't function independently. My favorite example of this is weight. So if you have good landing form, which we can talk about more about that, but like if you have safe landing form and you weigh 300 pounds, then in their data, weight doesn't affect your likelihood of injury. But if you have bad landing form, for instance, if you land on the outside of your foot or your femur rotates, then it's one of the leading factors causing to injury, because it's putting more newtons of force on the ligament where you're not supposed to be directing that stress, right? Does that make sense? So, so like, there's no, like in the univariate analysis, does weight cause an injury? The answer is no. It's not significant in the big study that would go in the academic journal. But in this like machine learning model with more variables, it's a huge factor if you have any other risk factors. And I think this is kind of stuff is frustrating all of these ACL findings too, right? So should you be squatting in an X pattern? Like, well, it depends how you move, right? Does your femur rotate or not, right? I think there's a lot of these things where it's just not a thing where we grew up with this is personal theory time, like your PE teacher wasn't a really philosophical person, right? Like we grew up with the idea that this part of school is kind of dumb. It's kind of simple.
It's the break. It's the break from actual school, right?
But it's a super complicated machine. And you got to use your whole brain. And very few people really understand soft tissue stuff at all. Even your regular doctor doesn't know anything about movement and injuries, right? Like I'm saying this to I'm a doctor's son. My dad was a doctor, and he would he would fly from England and pay $20 to go to my workout class, which was led by this woman named Eileen Vasquez, who was a physiologist. And she could look at how you move and say, I'm a little worried about this, that, whatever. And she was right. She would fix the problem. But he was the doctor and who had won awards and stuff, and he had no idea, right? He didn't know how any of this stuff worked. So I feel like there's it's stuff super complicated. We are running our own little orchestras here. Mostly they work really well, but they don't work simply, I think. And when anyone says, oh, everyone should do X, Y, and Z thing, it's like, that's probably not going to pan out in the research in the long run, I wouldn't guess.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that squatting and deadlifting actually are two of maybe the most technical lifts that I myself have gotten wrong for years. It's like ankle mobility wasn't there, knees stopped flexing at certain points. Then I started my chest started falling down because I was compensating. Like there's so many things that can go wrong in a squat to your point, where I think that you really do need that individual analysis and to be able to have someone, either you filming yourself and have the ability to say, okay, I can see where my knees stopped flexing there. I can see where my ankle mobility was changing the way that my sacrum had to compensate at the bottom of the squat or whatever, or have somebody who has some knowledge give you some feedback while you are squatting.
Eyes on your body, expert eyes on your body, I think is this is the problem. I mean, everyone I know does some kind of workout with their laptop open, but I'm always like, oh man, someone's got to see. I mean, when I work out, I've gone through the P3 regimen, and it's so embarrassing when I'm there. I have so many, I think of myself as an athlete, but they're like, could you straighten your leg? And I'm like, I thought it was straight. You know what I mean? I have so many oddities of just I think if I just had a camera, I would be so clear how kooky my body moves. But in real time, I'm like, oh yeah, I got this. And they're just like,
But you walk in there, you're like, I'm going to show these guys what a specimen, like how I can squat.
and soon they're like, can you stand next to the wall so you don't fall on another client? Actual thing that
Wow.
happened.
Oh my goodness. That's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It's intimidating when you're doing it right. I feel like, oh, actually, to your point about language, movement is like language. I think it's literally like language where, probably everyone listening to this doesn't have the full movement vocabulary they would like to have.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, when you add vocabulary, it doesn't feel comfortable. It's like walking into a cafe in Paris and you're trying to use your phrasebook French to like order a coffee and you're probably going to get embarrassed. And like that, all of the times I've learned about how to use my body better, I'm kind of in a cold sweat like that where I'm like, is this right? This feels weird. I don't know. Am I supposed to use this muscle like this? And like, that's what movement's like when you're getting into the outer reaches of your capacity.
And there's always another level, like there's always another level where you're like, oh yeah, I can really feel such and such muscle activating, or I can really feel a stability here. I really feel like I've engaged my pelvic floor. Like there's so many different levels, and it doesn't matter how long you've been lifting for, whether it's 2 weeks or 20 years. That's been my experience. Like there's always something new to learn about your own as you grow, you get stronger, your movement pattern changes, you're unlearning things as well. So that's the beautiful thing about it as well. Okay, I want to come back to, actually, I want to talk about translation, but I want to talk about hip mobility versus instability. I think that we hear a lot of like, we should be mobile, we should be bendy, we should be flexible and pliable. And maybe this is like bringing in the landing mechanics into the conversation a little bit, but what are some of the things that we want to be considering around whether or not our hips have good internal or external rotation, whether they're stable, whether they're unstable? What are some of the key sort of indicators if we're landing, let's say, or we're jumping from an 18-inch box to the ground? What are some things we want to think about as it pertains to the hips?
Mm-hmm. I find while you're in a ballistic movement, like jumping off the box, it happens too fast to even think about, and you probably want to just move naturally. It's like what they coach at P3. But I think in the lab, right, when you're at the gym or with your trainer or thinking about these things, they have sort of a shorthand you can do at home, a little test to test whether your hips are stable enough or mobile enough. The home test for if they're stable enough is really hard. Let's just be honest. But if you can side plank with your body in a big X and your upper leg lifted, all 10 toes pointing forward, and just lock that out and hold it for 30 seconds.
Oh, that's hard.
Really hard.
Wow.
For me, that last part with the leg lifted makes it really hard. But if you can lock that out for 30 seconds, then Marcus Elliott, founder of P3, is willing to say that he's just going to bet that your hips are stable enough and to perform whatever you want to do.
So side plank, the top leg is lifted and the arm is lifted, and then all 10 toes are facing forward.
Yeah, body,
Okay,
big X.
okay.
Lock it out for 30 seconds.
Okay.
I find very few people can do that before, but once you give it a little practice, you improve pretty fast. And that's a really good glute med exercise. But the glute med comes up a ton in P3. That's like I think that's the best exercise for just isolating and bulking the glute med, which is this great important muscle that's neglected in modern life. And then the other one for mobility is just sink into a standing figure 4. So this is where you're going to, like, for instance, stand on your left leg, put your right ankle just above your left knee, and then while balancing there, just sit low. And you want to get your hips below 90 degrees from your knee and really like sink in there. And I asked them to give me this test so we could do a simple thing. But before I did, Marcus was like, I think if your hips aren't mobile enough, you already know that, which is probably true.
Right. We used to do like a Trendelenburg test, which is just... But I mean, it's not quite as complicated as the figure 4, but it's basically lifting one leg. And what you're looking for is to see whether or not the hips become uneven. Like you're looking to see if you get like a dropping on the one side, which is a neurological finding that the nerve that innervates glute med is not able to recruit the muscle fibers, or that the muscle itself is weak. And
then you get this weird gait, right? I know there's some NBA players had this. Yeah. So I think that their basic finding is that everybody needs help with their hips. Almost everybody they assess comes away with some kind of recommendations to improve their hips. And it's generally either in improving stability, which basically means lifting weights for your hips, which a lot of people don't do, or it's in mobility, which means, this is a dumb shorthand, but yoga, right? It means like you're going to do a lot of difficult mobility type exercises. I'm in that camp, right? I'm a guy who needs hip mobility. Women tend to be more in the other camp where they need help with hip stability, but you need both is the main thing. We tend to work on the thing we're good at, right? So people, like I go to yoga sometimes, and when I do, everybody there has like wildly mobile hips. It's awesome, but like they're working at the thing they're good at, right? They should probably go to lift some weights, right? And do some sprinting, whatever. And vice versa, right? Like the people, when I go lift weights, those people should all be going to yoga, right? Because they can't move in a big range. So I think that your happy hips that will carry you into old age, moving well, jumping around, going for a jog if you want to. Basically, hips that do what you want to do are going to be mobile and stable. So you need to work on both.
Is there any data around internal versus external rotation? If there is somebody, if we do need to work on mobility, do we find that it is more, and maybe there's sex differences there, I don't know, but do we find like for women, maybe, I'm just guessing, but maybe more internal rotation versus external rotation, anything like that?
There is a section of the book where I dug into this a little bit. And I think I'm right in saying, I'm working from memory here, that like, I think they found that the work of improving external rotation is just more effective than the work of improving internal rotation. I'm not sure why, but like one of them is easier to move. And like, I think a lot of the limitations on internal rotation can be bony, right? So some people have a deformed femoral head or something. You're just not going to
Or the
change
acetabular cup is not deep enough and you're just hitting the tubercle or whatever. Yeah.
Right. You know the vocab of it. So I do think that there are answers to that, and I don't have them on top of my head. I think they're in the book of just basically, I think it's like you want to, when you stand up and lift your knee and they swing your foot, I think they want to get it so you have about 25% of a circle between your, does that sound right? Like the 25% of a pizza slice, pizza, like from your knee, your shin going like rotating in to rotating out. I think that's like the standard goal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of drawing on my own clinical, like what I would I would test internal and external rotation, and I would find for at least women, external rotation seemed to be easier. Yeah. Like we can all sit in like, in yoga, like butterfly pose, where you just put your feet together and then like the knees can just open, right? That's beautiful external rotation of the femur in the hip. Internal rotation may be a little bit more difficult. So if you're kind of moving the knee into the midline and kind of challenging there, that might be a little bit. Potentially, I'm asking because I don't know if there's any differences. So,
well, the other thing that I wish I had a better answer for you. The other thing I'll tell you though is that a tremendous percentage of the time when people test poorly on hip internal or external rotation, like the day one guess is that they needed myofascial release, and they do quite a lot of kind of painful stuff. They might teach you how to do it. Some of these things are like pretty awkward, kind of grinding on a kettlebell, like kind of stuff, like up at the top of your groin muscle. Or I watched a young basketball player get like a 70 kilogram kettlebell on his quad as he sat on the floor because he had super tight quads. Wow. And then after 2 minutes of that, he'd like lost all color in his face. He was uncomfortable. But then they immediately put him through like a whole complex of different stretches and lifting and complex movements to like ingrain a new pattern of moving his hip flexors in a new increased range of motion, and it works. It's really pretty crazy. You can measure the difference over 7-8 weeks.
So wait a minute, he put a kettlebell, a 70 kg. Did you say kilogram or pound?
Kilogram. It's like the heaviest thing in the gym. Yeah.
Okay. And he just put that on his quad. And what's like you're just trying to ischemically, like what are you trying to do with that? You're just trying to.
Yeah, good question. So I guess the research on myofascial release is that, it's inconclusive if it changes your range of motion over the long haul, but it isn't inconclusive if it changes it for 15 minutes, right? It absolutely does. So what they're doing is they're going to put you through, these are professional athletes who are used to doing really hard things, right? So I don't think they would recommend that anyone listening to this put 70 kilogram kettlebell on their quads.
Women that don't even weigh 70 kilograms that are listening to this. Yeah.
Get your family to stand on your quad. So he put it on there for 2 minutes each side. Well, backing up, he had, in one of the most basic tests they do is, and I'm sure you've done this before, is where you just kind of touch your heel toward your butt, right? Yeah. And he had lost a ton of mobility in that direction. He was only 18 or 19. And so they're like, it's weird that you've lost all this mobility in this particular direction. And a change like that, they see as kind of a red flag for injury risk. So they believed he could achieve much more mobility because he'd had it months before. And so he'd gone off.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but his decrease in mobility happened over a period of months, not years?
I mean, I don't, it might have been a year, but it wasn't forever,
Okay.
The first time he'd been there wasn't that long before. And so they take him over, they sit him down with his back against the cinder block wall, legs straight out in front of him, and bring him the heaviest thing in the gym and put it on his quad. And they're like, you have to be very cheery as a coach. They're like, hey, you got this. And you can see he's like, oh, I don't think I got this. And then as soon as they were done, they walk him over in front of the rig and had him kneel on one leg on the ground in front of him, and they put the biggest band in the gym around the rig and then around his midsection to pull in like a giant quad stretch, right? And it was such a big force that there was a coach on each side holding his upper body from like shooting forward because they're pulling him so hard. So they did that on both sides, and then they immediately went over and did, I forget the movements, but they were like hinge type movements where he's going to use the quad in its bigger range of motion. And they did I think 2 or 3 rounds of all that. And I didn't follow up on that particular guy, but I know that over time, this kind of therapy does result in like, a week later, you do the heel test and his range of motion is totally changed, right? So this is the kind of stuff, this is where I say it's kind of personal, because this is not a recommendation for anyone who doesn't have that particular problem, right? This is what they do there is they kind of assess each athlete and give them their own individual prescription of movement. The little app that they have, they send athletes away with prescription of like, I have my own little movement prescription. There's 600 videos, but they're going to give me the 12 for me or whatever, if that makes sense. Like just like you would with like a doctor would with prescriptions for medicine.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about hip mobility versus instability. I want to jump over the knees for a second. I want to come down to the ankles. You mentioned landing on the outside of the foot and rolling to the inside. So this translation or this, rolling your foot, let's say, as a predictor for injury, in particular with ACL tears. Let's talk about, first of all, how does something like that happen? Like, what are the mechanics that cause somebody to roll their ankle or to laterally roll and then come back to the midline? And then let's talk about re-injury risk. Because when I would have a patient coming in, a basketball player or just like a runner who had rolled on, like jumped, was running on grass or something, and there was a stick and wasn't prepared for it and rolled their ankle, the risk of injury rate in that first year after rolling the ankle, it was almost like, depending on the severity of the injury, somewhere between like 30 to like 70% chance of re-injury, right? So if they had a really bad strain, like a really bad sprain, I would say that within the year we'd be doing another protocol because, they thought that they were fine. And then the proprioceptive, like whatever the input coming up to the brain wasn't quite reestablished yet, and then rolled the ankle again. So talk to us a little bit about translation, what that means, and then maybe if we can integrate that into the landing mechanics conversation.
A quick aside is I was that guy. I did that in college. I sprained my ankle so badly that I went to NYU Health Services was like, it's one of the worst healthcare facilities on planet Earth. But the guys out there was like, oh, you shouldn't do sports anymore. Like you have sloppy joints. Like you just shouldn't do sports. And I was like, yeah, that's not, I was like 18 or something. It was such a crazy thing to say. Anyway, they at P3 now, they're more than a decade into collecting all of this crazy data on all these athletes, super fine-grained data. And they now see how your feet hit the ground as like how you put your hands up to catch a ball, right? Like of course you need active hands, right? Of course you have to get ready for it and you have to kind of like absorb it. And, you're going to have the muscles of your forearm are gearing up for it and everything. And I think that, when I've asked them, there's, these incredible trainers and MDs and biomechanists that they have there, what's going on with these landings? And it ultimately comes down to, in their view, it's sloppy. They're like, it's like you're just throwing your hands at the ball you're trying to catch and the ball bounces off your hand, right? This is an active thing. And it takes not just strong muscles of the lower leg, all of these post-tib and soleus and gastroc, and there are other ones too that you can name. I'm sure I can't. But we don't commonly work those out. And I think in many cases they're weak, which is a problem. But I think more commonly, it's just neurological coordination of like all of, these things happen in an instant, right? These landing moments are quick, and they're by far the biggest forces in sports, right? Bigger than any amount, you push into the bar when you're lifting weights, like the forces of you landing these are all the biggest forces in sports. And so it's big force, unfamiliar muscles, sloppy landing, and of course that's going to cause a problem. Would you like me to kind of talk about how they do want you to land now? That's probably most useful.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'm thinking about women who I've said, listen, you need to sprint. It could be a bike sprint, okay, but if you're thinking about sprinting, on a track or on the ground, we do have to be thinking about how you land. And then I also kind of want to think about this in the lens of like hypermobility, right? So if you if you are someone who sprained your ankle and maybe you haven't done the right rehab, what are some ways that you might think of, and I'm not asking you to give prescriptive, it's like you're not a doctor, you're not playing one on TV. Like I'm not asking for prescription, but what are some of the things that we can consider when we're thinking about, okay, how do I actually strengthen these ligaments that have been damaged? And now we have this altered feedback up to the brain, like where the brain can't necessarily accurately sense where the ankle is in space.
Yeah. So I used to sprain my ankles all the time, as I mentioned. And when I started going to like that kinesiologist woman would, she ran essentially a CrossFit type high intensity interval training class with lifting. And once I started regularly lifting, I stopped spraining my ankles entirely. I think I literally think I just built the muscles on my lower leg up. Like, when you're holding a heavy bar, you're stressing those little stabilizer muscles in your lower leg the whole time. What they would recommend at P3 is, everybody goes through this plyometric progression, right? So in the first assessment, there's a dowel on the floor and you are parallel to it with your feet together. And then you hop just like a little bunny back and forth over the dowel sideways, right? As many times as you can in 8 seconds. And that's pretty safe, I think. These are big forces, but I think most people can handle 8 seconds of back and forth and back and forth. And they're going to look at how you land during those 8 seconds. And then now we're going to talk about what plyometric prescription you get next. But basically, everyone who goes in there is jumping in one way or another.
Can I interrupt? Can I stop you for a second? You are jumping laterally. You're jumping left to right, right to left. Okay, so you're utilizing the coronal plane. Okay, go on.
And then, it might be that for the next several months, your plyometric exercise looks a lot like jumping rope or jumping over little tiny hurdles. Or they do some pretty cool stuff, actually, with like jumping where like you're going lateral and then the coach will be like switch, and then you switch which direction you're going, and some really awesome. There's a video of a volleyball player that I'll send you if you want. It's like the way that she moves is like thrilling to me. Where like the coaches are off camera and she's just like, she moves like usually when you see people move like that, it's like a wild animal, right? She just moves like so naturally and freely, and she's been practicing this for a long time. Anyway, so, but the end of the line, if you keep progressing and they keep seeing that they like your landings, is plyometric boxes in a row, and like NBA players are just 2 feet together, like little fleas going boing, 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 not even touching the boxes, just clearing over them. And what they're looking for is the neurological firing of the whole system, which is being trained by all of these plyometrics. And this is the big part where they're going to vary from a lot of other labs and trainers. They want you to land with toes up, with a dorsiflexed foot. And what they're looking for here is an active ankle so that the giant force of landing passes efficiently and quickly from the ground into your Achilles and your calf and your quad and your glute, right? So this whole kinetic chain is designed to take the huge force of landing, but they don't want it to be interrupted by some plyometric coaches coach toes down.
Yeah.
Which means when your foot hits the ground, there's a lot of moving parts before it gets to your Achilles and your calf and your quads and your glutes, and it can get awry. Like you're the kind of geek who will appreciate this little fact, which is like, so all of the biggest forces they've ever measured in this gym, which is, again, thousands of athletes, come from people landing toes down on the force plate. And then the next thing that happens in some cases is the heel slaps unbelievably hard, right? This is a bony surface that connects to your knee on the other end. So you have 80% of your weight is in your torso. That's pushing down at the ground, and the ground is immovable. And now you're going to express this force through bone, through your tibia, to your knee. And here's a really disgusting way to think about this, but it takes about 3,000 newtons to fully sever a human spine. And they've measured there's a small woman, she's a friend of mine, she's 5'5", her name's Katie Spieler, she's on the pro volleyball tour. They measured her landing with 3,100 newtons. They measured an NBA player landing with
10 times. 10 times ground, 10 times forces of what you just said about like the newtons required to sever a spine. Yeah.
No, so she's about at par, and they measured an NBA player with triple with 11,000 newtons. So the point is that like
you said 3,000. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
3,000. Pardon me.
But the point is, there's plenty of force. This is just stepping off an 18-inch box, right? So if you're dunking in the NBA, it's definitely going to be way more. But they measured an NBA player with 11,000 newtons, so triple the force to sever a human spine. So like you don't want that force going through your tibia straight to your knee, right? Which could, it might be okay in your knee. Maybe it goes and causes trouble in your lower back, right? But you don't want to pass it up that way. You want to pass it up your body through soft tissue, right? And specifically through the soft tissues that are designed to take huge forces, right? So this would be Achilles calf. I say quad, which it's not the whole quad, right? This is at the edge of my knowledge. Vastus medialis, maybe. And certainly you want to get into the glutes, because if you don't, a third of people don't deploy their glutes in their data, which is a giant cause of lower back pain, is landing from running or whatever without absorbing force into your hips and glutes.
That's so interesting. Toes up. So, I mean, I've always, with plyometrics, I think I actually have to pay attention now, but I think that my toes are the first point of contact, or is it the balls of my feet? I can't
Now it's in your head,
I have to go
right?
back and I'm like, which one am I doing? I don't know. But it's interesting too, because plyos, and I asked this selfishly because both of my children they're competitive. They play competitive soccer. So they're always doing these little drills, right? So they'll do like the back and forth drills, and then they'll put a weight plate, and then they'll jump up on the weight, down on the weight, and then across, up, down. Because, there's a lot of cutting and there's a lot of lateral movement in soccer, as there is in American football and many other sports like basketball, as you were mentioning. But I wonder as well the value, as I think about women who are aging, having the Achilles, have the ability to have that, to hold that. I don't know exactly the word the sentence I'm trying to say here, but what I'm trying to say is like this kinesthetic storage, like to have it, to be so springy, to have it used to. I mean, if you are, there's a guy out of, I think it's UC, University of California in San Diego. And I think he talks about like when you've had a Achilles rupture, one of the things where he gets into fights with the orthosurgeons where it's like actually an isometric hold is like one of the best things that you can do to retrain the Achilles, right? So it's like just like a 10-second isometric hold, and then you release. And of course, there's this whole like the ortho.
Why don't the surgeons want that? Because it's too risky.
Because they think that it's going to be like with the contraction that it's going to remove the sutures or the stapling, whatever they've done to secure it. So the 10-second to 20-second isometric hold just allows for that. Maybe tensegrity is the right word, but I'm trying to think of like what's the layman's word of like, being able to coil and then like being able to absorb the force and then release it. I mean, that's what the Achilles essentially is. So why, for women, why that's important, and this kind of gets into the hip flexor a little bit, is this ability to decelerate, right?
Yeah,
so if you want to, if you're landing, of course, the Achilles is going to take a big chunk of that slowing down of that velocity. But then I kind of want to wrap this into like falling as well. We talk about women are the ones who are falling and breaking hips, and you see the cognitive decline and the death risk that comes from that. So maybe talk to us a little bit about the value of being able to decelerate. And we can talk about the Achilles, we talk about the gastroc, but I would also like to wrap in the psoas or the hip flexor in there too.
Yeah. So in their research here with NBA players, they found that, there's a pretty famous NBA player named James Harden, and he was the highest scorer in the NBA when he came in with like 20 people into P3 to be assessed. These are people from his shoe company, people from his agency, people from his team, his friends. And when they assessed him, they found that he couldn't jump particularly high. He couldn't run particularly fast. Wasn't really explosive in any direction, but he was elite. He was outplaying the best athletes in the world. And the guy, Eric Liedersdorf, who's the president of P3 now, had promised them he'd give a little preview of the assessment results before they left that day. The full results take a couple days. And so he has this stressful moment of all these people want to hear about how great James Harden is. And he's looking at the numbers, and he's not a great athlete by most measures. But he's really good at decelerating. He's really good at stopping. And, this was 7 or 8 years ago. Now I think it's a lot more cool. But that he was like, "Hey, amazing news, James! Like you're good at stopping." And it's like not that cool, right? But they've since found that it is actually a superpower in every sport, right? It is really like it correlates well with the athletes who do best. When James was there, very shortly after that, a 17-year-old from Slovenia came in with his mom to be assessed, and they were like, "This kid's one of the best stoppers we've ever assessed," and his name's Luka Doncic, and now he's the star of the Lakers. Like he went on to have it is this kind of superpower of stopping. Even in one of their clients is a NASCAR team which has like pit crews, and they were saying that like these people, one guy in the pit crew has to race around the front of the car. It's a 3-meter curving race, and then put a tire perfectly placed so that someone else can screw it in place. And they found that basically, if you get the fastest runner, they're not anything like as good as the person who can decelerate really well. My personal theory is that when you can decelerate well, and I promise I'll get more to your point in a second, you can see. Like your eyes are still. When you have a good chain of soft tissues that help you decelerate, like James Harden can do these herky-jerky moves in the lane and he can see the rim. Or similarly, if you watch like a cheetah, there's like slow-mo video of a cheetah running, like their eyes, every predator's eyes are completely still while they're moving in these crazy ways because they have to see what they're doing, right? And I think, and so I think decelerating is emerging as this athletic superpower because, among other things, it lets you be stable. And I've even known, I was in the gym yesterday doing my prescribed P3 workout. One of the things that I was doing was holding a heavy ball in the hand while I step up onto a high box and then step back down under control. If I slam down on the ground, then my whole head's bouncing around. It feels kind of disorienting. I might even have my glasses fall off. It's happened. But if you have actually practiced these muscles, right? I'm going to lower myself down. I'm going to put the ball of my foot down, and I'm going to use the muscles of my lower leg to sort of land a little bit like one of those SpaceX rockets lands down on the landing pad to get reused. It's just way safer, right? It's a way safer way to move. And so I think this is a great thing for all of us to practice. It's, why we don't break well, I think isn't the same for all of us, but in general, it seems like the training has a lot to do with the posterior chain and all the muscles of the lower leg that we were just talking about, right? A lot of us are just very weak and sloppy where at the point of contact where our feet hit the ground. And that's something that you can train. I can tell you one thing they had people doing, which I love. I've done this a bunch myself, is it's one of a million exercises they have that are relevant to this, but it's not something I've seen somewhere else, is hold a kettlebell in one hand, stand on one foot, bend your knee a little bit, so you're in like an athletic position, and then just pass the kettlebell to your other hand.
Yeah.
Back and forth and back and forth. And for some of us, I've done this at dinner with friends. Some people can just do it. Not a lot of people. Most people are like, whoa, you're like, you're all over the place. But then you do it for a month and you can just do it. And you've like gained this. It's a nervous system training, right? You're just gaining a little bit of stability in how you put your foot on the ground. There's a million things like that, right? There are a million learnings like that come from jumping rope or from jumping on and off boxes or what your kids were doing, or, these ACL prevention programs that they don't have enough soccer players do are 64% reduction in ACL tears in women, right? Like they're training you how to land basically, right? They're training this neurological function of how to, do that lateral hop off the weight you were talking about, et cetera, right? This is essential, right? To healthy landing.
But even whether you don't have to be a professional athlete, like you need to, I think professional athletes have to know how to stop, but so do just regular everyday folk. Like we have to also learn how to stop quickly.
We go down the stairs. Yeah.
To go down the stairs, right? Or to not, if you misstep, to be able to catch yourself. Like that's the real value in it. So I think, and so the question that I have as you were talking is it, you were talking about your particular P3 workout, how you were stepping down slowly. Is it because we're biasing the eccentric? Is that what we're trying to train up with the deceleration, or is that maybe an adjunct or a side? Is that part of it or no?
Yeah, they do. Like one of the trainers there like really laments like NBA players are not sophisticated weightlifters by and large. Most of them didn't grow up like lifting heavy and this kind of stuff. So they can't do what trainers would like them to do is I don't even know what it's called, but like there's this like eccentric overload, I think it's called. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep. Yep.
So
I talk about it a lot. I actually think that it's like for hypertrophy, for muscle hypertrophy,
Yeah.
like you have to bias the long length of the muscle in order to create more muscle. Yeah.
So this is where you put a giant more than you can lift, right? You lower down this massive load, and then you like dump the weight or have one of those bars with like legs on it, or there's different ways to do it, right? They do it with the K-box.
Like a pull-up progression. Like you would jump
Yeah.
up and then you would like slowly lower yourself down. For women anyway. That's
Yeah.
a really great way to do it.
Or do you know this K-box? Do you know what I'm talking about? The K-box?
No, I've never heard of it.
So this is a weightlifting device that works with a flywheel instead of like a weight. And so it looks like almost like a microwave, right? It's a box that's about that size. You can stand on it, and then you would wear like a harness, and it has a cable going into the thing, and there's a spinning wheel that pulls the harness down, and then you have to fight it back up. But the cool thing is that it lets you, like, the more you pull up, then the harder you're spinning this thing, and so it pulls you harder down the next time, kind of thing.
Nice.
But it's a way to get a really heavy load. But then if you get to the bottom, it's too much force. You can just wait, and the wheel will like release you, basically. Anyway, there are these different tricks to get heavy loads, but yeah, they do want to, like, they definitely. I mean, again, this would not be the same for everyone, but they do put a lot of effort into this biasing this eccentric thing, as you suggest. Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about the psoas muscle then, because I think that this also pairs into the Achilles that we're talking about when we're talking about falling, like learning how to fall well so that you don't hurt yourself, I think is important. And with the psoas, I had Dr. Stu McGill on, who's just like one of my heroes. I studied his book when I was in chiropractic school.
Okay.
One of the things he was talking about is in order to, if you are, I mean, we all age, it's happening to all of us, but to preserve your fast twitch muscle fibers, particularly in the psoas, so that you can, if you are falling, that you have the speed to get the foot, like, so you can flex the foot and get it in front of you, because as your center of mass is going forward, you need to get that foot in front of you to and then brake and then put on the brakes, right? And then the brakes is like the glutes and the hamstrings, the ones that are all being eccentrically loaded there. So talk to us about why the psoas is one of these muscles that I think a lot of body workers, like chiropractors, physical therapists, massage therapists, were, always kind of getting into the psoas. But talk to us about why it's, I don't want to say a forgotten muscle, but when you go to the gym, you're like, I'm gonna work my psoas today. My psoas train. Like everyone's like, no, it's glutes day, it's ham day, it's quad day, it's whatever. So talk to us about the psoas and why it's so important.
Yeah, I make the case in Ballistic that we're hip illiterate, right? Like people, I went to school and we talked about, my basketball coach talked about our ankles and knees all the time, right? But the hips are the center of how we move. It's the most powerful and second most mobile joint in the body, and it's like it's translating between our heavy torsos and all this movement, right? And it's almost like forbidden to even talk about it, but like that's ridiculous. Like it's so important. And the psoas is probably the highlight of my argument here, because it's one of the biggest muscles in the upper body. It touches your spine, right? And it goes through like your belly basically, and then like around the front of your hip and then into your groin. And it's super important and powerful and strong and can do all sorts of stuff for you. And a lot of us suffer, like a lot of people have lower back pain. It might be because of your psoas. A lot of people have, an inability to move laterally, could be because your psoas, or I love your point about, so many people trip as they get older, right? Like you hit that little bump in the sidewalk or whatever, and they just can't get the foot out, right? This is a super, super important muscle that we barely even talk about. Since this book came out, I've had conversations with friends who were like, there's a chapter called psoa? Like, what is that? Like people don't know what it is. Meanwhile, to your point about soft tissue workers, I went through this psoas release. The first of my life was like, I was in your tears. I was like, it's not, you've done this? Have you had someone really jam their hand in there? Like,
yeah, I strained my psoas. I was ego lifting and just like so lifting, sorry. Like just thrusting to, like I was hip thrusting. I was doing it was like a split stance beat, like one-legged. And I was like, I just got a PR. Why don't I just put 10 pounds more on and see if I can? And then it was like, pop. And then couldn't stand up straight for like 2 weeks. So I've had someone, yeah, it's awful. You shuffle, like you're shuffling like an old lady, like you're bent at 90 degrees. I laugh at myself now because I brought it on myself. But one of my closest friends, she's a chiropractor. We've been adjusting each other for years. Obviously, I was going to see her for my care. And she tried to get on, She tried to get on it and I almost punched her. Like I was like,
Yeah.
like my reflex to protect that area. And we laugh about it, but like my other knee came up so quickly
Yeah.
to like get her off. And she was barely touching my skin. Like she
Yeah.
was just,
Yeah.
she was not putting it. She's like, I'm just going to flex. And my like, fight reaction came right away. Like I was trying to protect a very, tender, injured point on my body.
Yeah, I totally believe that. I totally understand that. Like this guy, Mike, who did it to me, we were having a pleasant conversation and he seemed like a nice man, like, and then he took his 8 fingertips, like, I mean, he's very strong, turns out. And I went through a whole bunch of emotions. I mean, it's weird, right? And
We store so much. That's the other thing. Like, there's a lot of emotions in the hips. There's a lot of stuff in the hips, and the psoas in particular. Like, I cry, sometimes from the pain of having it worked out and released, but also just because we just put stuff in the hips.
It's wildly personal. It's like there's no getting around it. And I mean, a bunch of people just can't do it, right? There are a bunch of people who like they get their first whiff of a psoas release and they're just like, nope, not going there. And it does feel to me, I mean, my family's English. I feel like we have this like the psoas releases where you get the English out of. Like I'm like English people. This is an unfair characterization, but like my English family, we don't really move our hips very much. And like so, Mike was kind of like, let's release your English conservative nature, right? And more into like, I'm like, now my hips can move, right? And that's
now I can salsa.
I got a shot at merengue now, right? I literally came out of that first one just feeling like I had a whole different, my pelvis had moved to where it was supposed to have been my entire life, right?
Wow.
But it's, and somebody told me, and this is quasi-scientific here, but basically the psoas forms super early in the embryo. Like it's one of the earliest, oldest things. And so it has literally stored all this stuff, right? Like,
wow, yeah.
Like a lot of and there's tons of nerves, right? There's like these nerves from your brain down your spine through this has something complex. You probably know the name, but like there's literally all of this activity beyond muscle activity going on with your psoas, right? And it's your spine and it's your hips and it's your communication going to your legs. Like, yeah. And so Marcus, the guy from P3, he had this day where, he's very sanguine. He meditates. He's very calm. He doesn't fly off the handle. But one day he was kind of mad, and he was mad because he had spent the morning assessing an elite tennis player, a guy who's like graduated from college and is hoping to be pro. He is a pro, but he's ranked like pretty low and he's hoping to get really good. And I think he was 24 that day and he had his first psoas release. And Marcus is like, he's been coached for more than a decade, right? He's put all of this resources into this, and nobody, like his career was literally going off the rails because he couldn't move laterally because his anterior hips were so tight that he just couldn't move. And his coach would just yell at him to like be more athletic. He's like, he's super athletic, but he just can't, he's immobile, right? And I think we're all a little bit that tennis player, right? Where we haven't grown up with good knowledge of our hips. I mean, obviously you're an exception because of your training, right? But I feel like by and large, so few people are really focused on these really important muscles like the psoas.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in perimenopause too, I mean, we often see shoulder injuries, we see frozen shoulder, but we also see we see hip bursts, like we see the bursa of the hip get irritated. We see changes in hip mobility. So this is why I'm really glad that we're talking about this as well.
Let me ask you, is this hip mobility, is this from using it too much or not enough?
Oh, both.
Both.
I think it really depends, but I would say that for a lot of people, we sit at desks, curled over like a shrimp for like 8 hours a day.
We're doing it right now. Yeah.
You were doing it right now. I mean, I am, to my credit, I am sitting in cross-legged. My legs are totally open. So I do have some nice external rotation.
Jealous. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think for most people, you can't sit cross-legged at the office and things just kind of get locked in after. It's not, it doesn't have to happen after a week. I think it happens after decades of being an office worker, working from home, wherever you are. So I love the idea of, we were talking before we started recording, you said something to the effect of, it's really natural to move. It's really unnatural not to move. Whenever I've been, just speaking of emotions, like whenever I've been frustrated, I go for a walk. I just lap the block. It takes me like 7 minutes. And just that 7-minute walk, I'm like, okay, I can totally deal with this problem. I totally have the capacity now. And it was just whatever it was, no blood in my brain, like my prefrontal cortex had no blood left in it. So the walk, kind of helps it a little bit. I'm able to just listen to some birds and watch the leaves rustle in the tree. It's just whatever it is helps with my emotional processing. But to your original question, I think you can have, I've cared for athletes and I've cared for, the everyday person. And for the most part, it's like you have to unlearn mechanics that, if you are sitting at a desk, let's say 8 hours, 10 hours, 12, 16 hours a day, there's going to be a limit to the amount of rehab because you have to unlearn all of that, right? You times a 10-hour workday by 40 years. I absolutely can make some progress with you in our appointments together, but you also have to set it, right? So I can release things for you and things can move, but if you just go back to doing exactly what you were doing after the appointment without the rehab, and that's the single biggest sticking point that I ever had with patients was like, as soon as they started feeling better, the rehab would just drop off the planet, right? So I had a hard time with like compliance, and I used to really beat myself up about it. I'm like, I'm like the worst doctor. I don't know why I can't get people to like totally change 100% of the time. But it was really just for most people, like just get the pain subclinical, and I'll just get back to it. And when it pops up again, I'll come back to you. Like that's sort of how many patients, unfortunately, and very transparently and honestly, I felt like that was just like the governing desire.
That's kind of how PT worked. I was frustrated. Like I went through a whole lumbar crisis during the time I was writing this book, and I love my physical therapist, Jen. But like her, the insurance model basically is just get Henry back to work, right? Get him driving a car,
Right.
get him back to the
Right.
desk, and then we're done, right? But I wanted to get back to doing really fun things, right? And it took other efforts, but I think this is like more, Marcus is pushing 60 and he loves doing giant outdoor things, climbing mountains and paddleboarding 30 miles at a time across the ocean and just all these crazy things. And, to him, that's the goal. The goal is to do really, really fun, free moving things out in nature. Yeah. And the price you pay to be able to do that is some, prescribed work on it. If his particular issue is his right hip has poor external rotation, right? So you have to like maintain that. He finds it very boring and tedious, and he does it while he's watching TV, right? He'll like, I gotta do my homework, right? Like, so like to him, the end goal isn't the homework. The end goal is really, really fun outdoor stuff. And I think that's where I just wrote this story for the Atlantic, like called "Let Your Kid Climb That Tree." And it's about like, just movement vocabulary, and freedom of movement is a way to like, play is what you call it when people are exploring freedom of movement, right? And one of the people from P3 read the article, and he's like, the only thing that's wrong with your article is the adults should be in that tree too, right? Like,
yeah.
Like we should all be giving ourselves permission to go and do really fun things. And yeah, you're going to have to go and see Dr. Stephanie and work on some stuff, right? There's going to be some issues. We all have issues with our bodies, right? I've got my own prescribed things. I do my workouts 4 days a week. I have 4 workouts a week that are prescribed for my particular, I was born with hip dysplasia, and I've got a little maintenance to do on that front, right? Everyone else has their own things. But I think, but mostly the focus for me isn't those 4 days a week. It's the other 3 when I get to go do whatever fun thing I'm invited to do, right? I'm a yes man, right? Someone says, you want to come on this hike or this kayaking thing or this, we go jump off this waterfall near here. I'm telling you, people love it. It's so fun. Everybody coming back from that is like bubbling and excited. And I think that's where it really gets fun is, take your fun impulsive walking in the block and being in the fresh air and take it to the max, like what's the most fun thing you want to do? Let's go do that thing.
I love that. And that comes back to our original conversation around physical literacy. Like if your friends are like, hey, do you want to come and play pickleball? And you're like, I've never done it, but I'm sure I can, figure it out. I think that that acquisition of new skills, new motor skills, I think is something that we should all be striving to in our lives as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And also just look to move. I mean, look, we have our printer up here in the attic, and I am getting older, and I'm forever like, oh, I forgot to print the document while I was upstairs, and I have to go upstairs again. But now I've switched to like, good. I'm glad I'm going again, right? Just do more. Or like, you're taking all this stuff to the beach and you didn't remember, like, fine, just walk back and forth 5 times. Who cares? Like, like it's like move. This is what we did. I'm telling you, if we lived in the Stone Age, we would all be walking back and forth to the car 10,000 times, right? It was just so, we were nomads, right? I think that, the idea that we have some idea that if you're smart and efficient, then you're going to go straight from the house to the car, and from the car, get a good parking spot and go right to the thing. And like, that's not what your body wants to do. Your body wants to just have all these inefficient periods of just wandering around and picking things off the ground and bending over. And like, that's what your body is designed to do. And so I think let it happen,
I actually really like that point around your body wants periods of inefficiencies. I think that we're so wrapped up in like, okay, so if I do this, I can save 5 minutes, or I love this idea of just being inefficient. This is part, I had Juliette Starrett on the show not too long ago.
Yeah.
She's phenomenal. And she was saying, we just sit on the floor. Like we just move the coffee table. We sit on the floor. That's when we do our mobility work. I'm like, adopting immediately, because it's so easy, because so many like, I don't have time for my mobility work, I don't have time for my whatever. And I have my kids doing like their rehab on the couch with us. I'm sitting on the floor stretching my adductors or whatever.
And you're doing that 10-minute squat test. I know they started that whole thing.
Oh yeah. I'll do the couch. I'll do I'll be doing the couch test, which is like that nice big quad stretch, or I'll do like a full squat, and I'll watch TV. It feels great. And I'm just like, it's just the movement. It's just like, you're just when I sit on the ground and after a couple of minutes, I'm like, I need to move now. It's like, I just move. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not efficient in any way. It's just, I'm just going with the flow. So I love that.
Yeah. Your body kind of knows, right? If you listen.
Yeah. This has been such a fantastic conversation. I love this. So tell us where we can find your book and where we can find more about you and your work.
So I'm trying to like funnel everything to henryabbott.com, which is my author website. And it's, my last name is, nobody wants to give me the last T. They always say ABBOT, but it's ABBOTT.
Yes, double T, double B.
Double B, double T. Yep, okay, 6 letters. Okay. So henryabbott.com. Right. And like when I'm on this show, I'll add all the things like to that thing, and you can see all the updated things and the Atlantic article, whatever. And then TrueHoop.com is where I spent most of my career writing about NBA basketball, and that's where that happens, is TrueHoop. And I'm not on a lot of social media. I'm still just hanging on by a thread at that Elon Musk site. That's not because I recommend
Elon Musk site. Twitter? Like,
yeah.
Is that what you mean? Oh, yeah. Okay. Or what is it called? X. Yeah.
And it just gets sadder by the day, but that's just, anyway, it's, that's where for some fair amount of time.
About the car? No. Okay, great. Okay, yeah. So we'll put your handle, your X handle there.
Okay.
And this has been fantastic. I love talking about injury prevention, and I think that you did a really great job sort of funneling this towards women who want to be aging well and thinking about injury prevention there. So thank you so much for that.
No, those are my best friends and my wife that we talk about this all the time. Yeah, this is a home game for me. But no, thank you for doing this. Thank you for having a show where I get to nerd out a little bit and not be scared of using words like so as.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the after party, where I tell you exactly what I thought of this episode and what my key takeaways were. If I liked the guest, didn't like the guest, I spill the tea, so to speak. And the after party, as we are all moving towards menopause, that's my loving term for after party is my loving term for menopause. We all want to be there, and you're all invited. So that's where we are, and that's where we are here. So my takeaways here. This was, first of all, as you know, this was more of a dark roast Betty episode. So this was where I get really, really excited about biomechanics. And I caught myself saying anterior superior iliac spine. And I was like, whoa, girl, trim this back. But I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you feel like it was just right up your alley, please let us know, because we can do more dark roasts like this as well. But a couple of my favorite takeaways was the idea, I think one of the main ideas was that deceleration, or being able to stop, is a superpower. And we talked about this in a couple of different ways. So we talked about this in the context of the hip flexor muscle, the psoas muscle, or properly the iliopsoas muscle for my dark roasters. He's right. Like the psoas goes basically from your spine and sort of wanders through the abdomen and then eventually attaches to your femur. And you need to be able to get that foot in front of you in order to break a fall. You also need the psoas to translate, to be able to move left and right. And so he created a very compelling case for why the psoas muscle is so key for being able to stop. And I think every sport, any sport that you're doing, you need to be able to stop quickly, change direction. But even if you're not someone who plays sports, I think being able to learn how to fall and to fall well, I think is very, very important. So there's that. And then the other aspect of deceleration that we were talking about was in the context of falling from or jumping from a plyo box, let's say an 18-inch or whatever inch plyo box down onto the ground, and having the Achilles and then some of the structures on top of that, like the quads and the glutes, being able to absorb a lot of those ground reactive forces. So I thought that that was very, very cool. Learning how to fall, biasing the eccentric, which is maybe why you hear me always talking about when you're squatting, when you are in the hole, basically when you are at the lowest part of the squat, that is the most important part of the squat, when the muscle is long and weak, because that is where you're going to gain and garner the most strength. I like the other thing I really liked was and I actually gotta videotape myself now, is the idea that training with the plyometric progressions with your toes up. So your toes being dorsiflexed, like off the ground. I think I might be jumping with my toes down. Like, I think that may be a cue. Like when he said it, I'm like, oh damn, I think I do jump, like my toes are the first ones that hit the ground. So I really like that. And then I love the conversation around hip mobility and instability. I think that depending on your background, your fitness literacy, we'll say, you're probably going to have one of two things. I really like the example that he gave when he's like, whenever I go to a yoga class, like people are putting their, legs behind their heads, or whatever it was, like everyone's so bendy. He's like, but you're really training a strength that you already have. And so those yogis who are very bendy, very pliable, very flexible, would probably benefit from doing more strength training to create more stability in the hip, because there is always a trade-off between those two, right? So whether you have a lot of muscle, when you start to get too much muscle, you start to trade off your pliability and your mobility, right? So it's like, there's almost this like U-shaped curve almost, where you almost become more debilitated, like the more muscle you have. I mean, women, it's going to be very hard for you to get there, but if you look at bodybuilders, where their elbows are basically up to their ears, or you ask a bodybuilder, a male bodybuilder, I'm thinking of in particular, like to scratch his own back, like he's not going to be able to like internally rotate the humerus and kind of get the arm to scratch his back. So there's sort of like you ride the maximal benefit of building enough muscle, and you can get into it can be negative returns as well. So those are kind of my favorite points. We were super, super nerdy here, and if you enjoyed it, let me know. If you didn't enjoy it, let me know. If you want more around injury prevention, let me know. I'm happy to do solo episodes as well. I have a lot to say. I spent 19 years in practice talking and doing all injury all day long. So if you found this episode helpful for you in any way, please feel free to leave us a 5-star review on Apple or on Spotify. We see all the comments. We see all the things that are left for us. So I hope you enjoyed this. And until next time, I bid you adieu.